I remember thinking, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this is what love is supposed to look like. Going into that relationship, I didn't know where the line was.
Angela Diaz is telling police that she's being stalked.
All signs point to her fiance's ex, and her arrest sets off the strangest true crime story in modern history. It's the story of Michelle Hadley.
A strange and violent stalking case.
A jealous wife, romantic rivals, blackmail.
The media calls her deranged and obsessed. She's charged with stalking, criminal threats, attempted rape.
And here's the thing, y'all. She didn't do any of it.
I remember thinking, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this is what love is supposed to look like. Going into that relationship, I didn't know where the line was. It became this horrible nightmare.
On paper, this looks like a pretty stand-up guy.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he's a U.S. Marshal. So he was already using law enforcement as a mechanism to control and keep me in the relationship. Everyone always asks, why didn't you leave?
The risk when you did eventually leave was something no one could possibly have imagined. You are made to be a red herring in your own victimization.
It was just a massive failure in just any willingness to investigate. When I think about Angela, I think of her as his pawn, his weapon, something that he used. I'm not afraid anymore.
Hey, y'all, welcome to the Crime Scene Office. My name's Jonathan Hirsch.
And I'm Cooper Moll.
And today we're doing something a little bit different on the show. Normally, we're unpacking a case over 3 acts, but today, the story is sitting across from us. And I don't mean me and you.
Yeah, so by the time you're watching this episode, Netflix's latest true crime documentary is out, and it's called A Toxic Love Story. And if you've opened Netflix at all this week, you've probably seen the show art.
So this documentary begins with the story of a newlywed who is receiving these threatening emails from an anonymous sender who goes by the name of Lilith is Truth. And at first, all signs point to her fiance's ex. Now, that individual is arrested, and her arrest sets off a chain of events that would make up the strangest true crime story in modern history.
And if that premise sounds familiar to crime scene viewers and listeners,
Yeah.
it should, because we covered this exact case on our show and we called it the Fake Stalker.
Right. It's the story of Michelle Hadley. And something that we have been sitting on for a couple of weeks here that I'm very, very excited to announce to you today is that Michelle Hadley, the subject of the new Netflix documentary, A Toxic Love Story, is here in the Crime Scene Office to share her story with us today.
And her side of the story is honestly the version we've wanted since the very beginning, Jonathan.
Absolutely. And I think all of you too as well.
So before she comes in, we should probably catch everybody up.
Yeah. So let's tell you a little bit about this story. For those of you who have listened to our episode on Crime Scene or have already seen the Netflix doc, consider this a little bit of a refresher. But here's what you need to know.
So the story begins in 2016 in Anaheim, California. Angela Diaz is newly married to Ian Diaz, a U.S. Marshal. And she's telling police that she's being stalked. She's getting these violent emails. There are Craigslist ads out there inviting strangers to come over to their condo to assault her. And men are actually showing up at the door. And then Angela's attacked in her own garage.
911, what's an emergency? Somebody came from behind me and it started to choke me.
And every piece of evidence, in the beginning at least, appears to point to Ian's ex-fiance, Michelle.
Michelle's arrested. She's charged with stalking, criminal threats, attempted rape. These are charges that are stacking up to a potential life sentence. Her bail was set at $1 million. The media calls her deranged and obsessed. She spends nearly 3 months in Orange County jail.
And here's the thing, y'all. She didn't do any of it.
We were both thinking the exact same thing, which is, holy shit. It's Michelle sending the emails.
Those emails, the IP addresses trace back into the condo where Ian and Angela lived. The garage attack wasn't real. So much about who Angela said she was is not real.
We were on the couch. She divulged that she had cervical cancer, and the cancer had progressed to stage 4.
She knew she wasn't dying. We found in the bottom drawer there was medical tubing and gauze. So she could make it look like something was sticking out of a port. I don't know what's going on. You're lying to everybody. I don't know what your game is, but I'm on to you.
So in 2017, Michelle was fully exonerated. Angela Diaz pled guilty and got 5 years. And in 2023, Ian, the man sworn to uphold the law, was sent away for a decade.
So join us now for a very special conversation with Michelle Hadley, the subject of the new Netflix documentary, A Toxic Love Story. She has an incredible perspective to provide all of us about what she has been through, and I can't wait for you all to hear from her. Welcome to Crime Scene, the show where we tell the stories behind the world's most unforgettable crimes. Michelle, thank you so much for being here today. It is a privilege to meet you, and we're just so grateful to have you on the show.
Thank you for having me. Yeah.
Let's begin at the beginning because some of our listeners and viewers will have seen the documentary. Some of them are encountering your story for the first time. You meet Ian Diaz
Mm.
in 2013, and on paper, this looks like a pretty stand-up guy.
Oh, for sure. I mean, he's a US Marshal.
Right.
So, when I first met him, I was out dating and he was
Yeah.
not the only guy I got a date with. And I actually had a date with this guy he had a motorcycle, he had sort of long, shaggy hair, a little bit more wild.
Yeah, yeah.
And then I had a date with Ian, and, he's this US Marshal, a little bit more rigid, a little bit, and I remember thinking, well, if my goal is to settle down and have a family, I probably should go with someone who's a little bit more settled themselves. He's
Right.
got a good career. He's a stand-up guy. I don't know about this motorcycle stuff. It's exciting, but like,
Yeah.
it may not be good if I want to have a family. And so I thought I was getting into, something that was safe, um, something where I assumed he was background checked, you know?
Right. And in the documentary, um, you talk about how this was somebody who also seemed very attentive to you
Yes.
and considerate, at least at first,
Uh huh.
and almost to the point that it caught you off guard. How do
Yeah.
you think about those early stages now?
Well, so one memory really stands out to me, and that was, our second date. He took me to Disneyland, and I hadn't been to Disneyland since I was high school.
Right.
And I remember thinking it was a little bit of an odd choice, because we were two adults. But then I thought, well, how like romantic. We're going to this kind of fairy tale place, and when we got there, he put down. I mean, it must have been at least $200 as a down payment for an annual pass for me, and he said we're going to be coming here a lot together. And, I'm like, whatever, I'm like 25 at this time. And I'm
Right.
thinking, oh my God, this is so romantic. No one's ever done something like this for me.
Yeah.
And so I remember thinking, well, maybe this is it. Maybe this is what love is supposed to look like, someone who really cares about me, um, you know, does these nice things for me. And, I got a little swept off my feet in those
Right.
moments. Yeah.
Right. Here's this trustworthy guy. He has in an upstanding profession,
Hmm.
something you presume would be vetted, and he's very attentive. He's taking you to these on these adventures.
Yeah. Yeah.
Seems like somebody that you might want to get more serious with.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And of course, as the documentary also shows, that relationship eventually falls apart, and we'll of course talk a little bit about
Yeah.
how all of that happened. But one thing that I thought was particularly notable in the documentary is that very early on, um, they show the police interviews with you,
Yes. Hmm.
and you acknowledged that some of the correspondences
Yeah.
that made up what would ultimately sort of be the charges that were leveled against
Yeah.
you did in fact come from conversations that you were having, right,
Mhm.
with him. Can you talk about the decision um to sort of bring that to light in the series?
For me,
Yeah,
one of I think the most important messages I can get out there is that um, there is no perfect victim. And every single time you see a woman who has been through severe domestic abuse, there has been a moment where she has cracked because the abuse has pushed her that far.
right,
And so, anytime we are dealing with domestic abuse survivors, whether it's law enforcement dealing with them, court systems dealing with them, friends, family, the media, we always should be keeping that in mind that these relationships, they're designed to actually make you crack, make you break. And for me, hiding that stuff doesn't really do anyone any service. Because if all I do is go out there and say, oh, I was this perfect victim, little Princess Michelle, I'm always so
right.
perfect, then all of a sudden I'm setting this unreasonable standard that I didn't even meet for other victims. So I really wanted this to be an honest documentary where we got into some of the darker sides of what it looks like to be in one of these relationships, what it really does to you.
So yeah, you're pointing to the fact that what you found when you got more and more involved with with Ian was that there was a lot of control issues.
Yeah.
And I found it quite profound that that piece of the story came out so early, to your point,
Yeah.
because it it allows people to see what it's like to be under the duress that you were under
Yeah.
inside of that relationship and how stretched to the limit you were.
Yeah. Um, there is a really physical, visceral, aspect to what domestic abuse does to you. Um, he was disrupting my sleep on purpose. The abuse, it was so up and down, and the ups were so high and the downs were so low that, looking back now, especially because it's been so many years later, I know a lot now about nervous system regulation and I
Right,
know a lot about mental health because I've obviously had to unpack a lot of that. I look back and I'm like, I mean, my nervous system wasn't just dysregulated. It was like he had just blown it to smithereens,
right.
So I would be sitting somewhere and I wouldn't even be able to focus on my work or my schoolwork or anything because, it was like your brain is just constantly spinning over some of the things that he had done or something he had said or something that happened, last night and you're worried, is he going to push me again tonight? Or when I go home from school, is he going to be nice and normal? You're constantly on edge and living like that for, essentially 2 years, it does a number on you. And how can it not? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And some of the viewers of the show will know because we've talked a little bit about it on the story and about coercive control,
Yeah.
both in scenarios where there's some kind of cult-like group where people are being controlled or manipulated by an individual who demands their um, submission to a greater idea, and you have to make sacrifices to be part of that idea. But that can be true not only in a cult like situation, but so often in relationships where you think you're doing things for the purposes of the relationship because love is about sacrifice.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
then where where's the line?
Yeah. This is something that I have really dug into after this relationship because I realized that going into that relationship, I didn't know where the line was.
Mm,
I had that exact mentality of, we're in love.
yeah.
Love isn't always perfect. You have to put work into it. It's not always easy. You have to sacrifice for it. And
Maybe even a sign that
eh,
this is an important relationship that you
yeah,
have to like
yes,
work for it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because that's what you're always told,
That's what
right?
we're told. Yeah.
And, I don't wanna be unrealistic. Of course, relationships take work, and of course, they're not always perfect. But, we really need to do a better job, I think, in our society of teaching what healthy love looks like and
Mm,
where that line actually is. And, I mean, I guess at the baseline, healthy love never requires you to submit to someone else's control or domination.
right.
Right. And that is where, when you get into these coercively controlling relationships, that's what they're all about. Right. Every single abusive relationship you look at, everything the abuser does is all about gaining control and power over the victim. And so, when Ian was disrupting my sleep patterns, right? Well, okay, he's weakening me so that I can't stand up to him, right? Because I'm too tired, I'm too disoriented. When he is monitoring my whereabouts, or even, there was one instance where he actually showed up with me at a thing that was supposed to be just like a girls' gathering, and I hadn't even told him it's just a girls' gathering, and he just shows up. It was an isolation tactic, right? To make sure not only that my friends were like, "Oh, we don't know if we want to invite Michelle because she's gonna have her guy here, and he's gonna sit there all," I mean, he sat there and he was like just a mood the whole time. So I mean, I'm sure they were like, "Oh God, we don't want to invite her again," and they didn't invite me again. But then I'm also embarrassed, so I'm, like, afraid now to connect with other people, and there was a pattern of isolation as well, and so all of these tactics are things that, coercive controllers or abusers, use the words interchangeably, use
Right.
to break you down and take over your whole universe, really, you know?
Right. He's
Yeah.
all around. I mean, and you
Yeah.
talk about this, right?
Mhm.
There's getting the phone calls at every hour of the
Yeah.
day and just sort of feeling like if
He
you went outside of the boundaries of where
Yeah.
you were supposed to be, it was like a little light dinged and
Yeah.
you had to come back.
I remember that day when that first happened, and it was like this sneaking suspicion, and at that time I was
Mm,
in the relationships. I wasn't seeing it clearly,
right.
but I just was like, "Whoa, that's weird."
Yeah.
He never calls like this out of the blue. Why now? And it sort of started to dawn on me, oh, he must be tracking me, you know? And he did. He had access to all of my devices. He even had done work where he'd done something in my engine, my car. So there was always in my head, does he have some tracking device on my car? Is it
Uh,
through my phone? Is it through my iPad? He had all my passwords.
right.
I didn't have any of his, but he had all of mine.
Right.
So it was this very one-sided dynamic where he had so much power to surveil me, to know what I was like, possibly what I was searching online.
Yeah.
And it can feel when someone is doing that level of surveillance on you, it can actually feel like they're almost in your head. I don't know if I'm explaining it well, but it's like
Mm,
there's this sense that they're reading your mind almost. And
yeah.
so that in and of itself it makes you feel paranoid, and of course, right? Because you're like, well, how do they know all this stuff,
Right.
right? How would they even find this out? You live in constant state of fear and hypervigilance. Yeah.
Right. Because he's crossed into your boundary,
Yeah.
even though you have no access equivalently to the same
Exactly.
crossing of his boundary.
Exactly.
So he maintains, and this is so common, right? Like
Mhm.
this state of composure
Yes.
and distance
Yes.
from any sort of retaliation you might have to
Hmm.
setting those boundaries. And
Exactly.
yet you have this voice in your head
Yeah.
of this person who has access to all of your comings and goings. This must have
Exactly.
been terrifying and
Yeah.
difficult to reel yourself out of.
Absolutely. And, I always tell people, look, everyone always asks the infamous question, why didn't you leave?
Mm.
And I always tell
I'm not gonna ask you
people,
that
yeah,
question.
I had a feeling you wouldn't. And I always tell them, well, first of all, I did try to leave multiple times
Mm.
and it wasn't successful. I knew I needed to leave. And so there was one day where I could hear Ian talking to his friend Leslie. This was my chance to get out because I knew he wouldn't do anything while she was there. As I drive away, my hands are literally shaking on the wheel, and I'm crying, hoping to God he doesn't follow me. At that point, my bank account is drained because it's all gone into the condo. My parents' house was the only place I knew to go. And I felt like I'm here. But I'm realizing it's not over, and he has actually no intention of letting it be over. The first time I tried to leave, he pulled out a phone and he threatened to call the cops on me just for wanting to leave the relationship.
Wow.
So he was already using his association with law enforcement as a mechanism to control and keep me in the relationship. The second time I tried to leave, he escalated to getting physical and he blocked my exit, threw me down on the bed, and it was horrifying, right?
Wow.
So there are many cases where we don't actually see the victim exit like fully the relationship, but it doesn't mean they haven't tried.
Right.
We haven't seen it because it's all been kept behind closed doors. And the other thing I tell people is that we don't give victims enough credit.
Mm.
We understand the danger we're in. And actually, if you study domestic abuse, most of us who do will tell you that the most dangerous time for a victim is the 2 weeks after she leaves an abusive relationship. That's when most of the murders happen, most of the big, incidences happen.
Right.
And I think on some intuitive and implicit level, most of victims understand the risk that they are in when they leave.
Right.
So it becomes this almost calculation of, well, is the risk of staying now greater or less than the risk of leaving? Because there's a risk either way. You're kind of screwed no matter what. But you're basically in your head saying, well, it kind of looks like he's escalating to the point where he might actually hurt me. Maybe now it's better to leave, and then
Right.
how do I get out, right? Because sometimes he's trapping your exit, so you have to find the right moment as well. So it's very complicated for victims to leave, and that doesn't even get into the dynamics of a trauma bond, which is a whole other, kettle of fish.
Right. And the risk of leaving when you did eventually leave that relationship was something no one could possibly have imagined.
Yeah. Exactly. I mean, right there, nail on the head. I knew he was going to do something to me, and I
Right.
was telling people he was going to do something to me.
Mm.
And in fact, when I was with him, he actually foreshadowed it a little bit because I remember him asking me on a car ride. He told me about, because he worked in prison systems, he told me about Romeos. That's the designation you get when you are a sexual assault criminal, like meaning
Mm.
you did, there was a rape or something along those lines. He told me about their conditions and he asked me how I would feel if I was one of them. And I told him it would be my worst nightmare.
Wow.
Well, I mean, come on, down the road, what ends up happening? But
Right.
that's exactly the crime that I am charged with, and I am labeled a Romeo in the
Right.
jail system. And then when I say labeled, I mean the guards would literally say R3 Romeo coming through. They would call it out. So everyone else in the jail knew that you were a
Knows.
Romeo. And you had this like designation as, oh, you committed this sexual offense, even though obviously I hadn't. But so I knew, I mean, I didn't know that was what he was going to do when he said that, but I knew he was going to do something bad.
Right.
And no one listened. Everyone told me I was overreacting. And then, just as you said, it became this horrible nightmare down the road.
So, in a way, the way that he manipulated that situation puts you in the exact opposite situation than the one you, in fact, were escaping. It is like gaslighting
Yeah.
to a T.
And Darvo too. That's a term in the survivor community. It means deny the attack, reverse victim and offender. And he effectively took everything he did to me and
Mm.
he flipped it and said, "No, she's the one doing all this stuff."
Right.
You know, and it's the most horrifying feeling in the world.
And you do find justice, and you're here with us,
Yes, alive.
thankfully. So happy for
Yeah.
that. Um, but still, in a way, I wonder, when I was watching the
Mhm.
documentary, how it must feel to sort of, the way these stories are told. We all
Mhm.
know, right?
Yeah.
Like, they're told both from the point of view of journalism, and we talk about this on the show a lot, and from the point of view of entertainment.
Yes.
So
Mhm.
people are entertained by these stories. Sometimes they're learning about true crime from true crime stories, but then sometimes these stories are told in a way that kind of withhold certain details for suspense and all of that.
Mhm.
And just by the nature of this case and your story, you are, in a way, made to be a red herring in
Mhm.
your own
Yes.
victimization, in your
Mhm.
own story where you
Mhm.
are the victim.
Mhm.
You're also like a red herring in that story,
Mhm.
if that makes sense
Yes.
to you. And I wonder how that feels.
When I first, popped out of jail, and was exonerated,
Yeah.
uh, y y I'll put it really bluntly, it messed me up pretty good, you know?
Yeah.
There was just a lot of healing that I had to do from that because, people forget that when you are the victim of these things, you still have to, I'm still out there trying to live, you know? I have to go get a job.
Yeah.
So at that point, I'm still was interested in dating and, I wanted to
Yeah.
have a family and stuff.
You want to have a life. You
Yeah,
deserve a
just a
life.
normal
Yeah.
life. And I had been a very private person before all of this happened. I had almost no presence online. And so all of a sudden I was out there. There, massive amounts of articles of me online. It really shifts your way of relating to the world. Um, the first, I would say probably 2 to 3 years out were pretty rough,
Mm,
But then, I did a lot of healing work, did a lot of therapy, and I think I also just really went after it with reclaiming my life. Like I was just very bold. I went out there. I was like, I'm going to relaunch my career. I'm going to
mm,
move to a new city. I'm going to do all the things, even if it's still kind of hard and there's still roadblocks. And I got to a place where I was able to make peace with it and then also realize kind of almost like I call it crossing over whenever you kind of reach that evolution point where you like kind of move. And for
yeah.
me, it was this realization that I could actually embrace the power of almost the monster narrative, but flip it
Mm,
and take it kind of into another stage where I now turned around and pulled other survivors along with me. And
right.
so it was really finding that like larger purpose for me that I think allowed me to process that in just a healthier way, where it
Right.
doesn't bother me now like there was a time where if I had seen this documentary and the way it's
Mm,
laid out, right? Because there's a little bit of that element in the beginning, it would have triggered me. But now, because for me, this is all about a larger purpose of reaching domestic abuse survivors
right.
and reclaiming my story, it doesn't anymore. And
Right.
that's a very powerful place.
You
Yeah.
you are incredibly open and vulnerable in this documentary and brave, might I add. And, I think to that point, at one point in in the documentary, you talk about ways in which you were manipulated within that relationship
Hmm. Yeah.
such that you felt that even a part of yourself, a more innocent part of yourself had died.
Yes.
And here you are on the other side, bringing victims of similar experiences along with you in a way that is so powerful and can help other people see the situations that they're in, and hopefully change their situation if they
Yeah.
are not in the right one. And I just wonder how you found that strength to reclaim maybe the parts of you that felt
Yeah.
corrupted or
Yeah.
disturbed by this person and their
Hmm.
own disturbance. How did you find your way back to a place where you felt like I am whole again?
For me,
Yeah.
uh, I had to really let go of that old version of Michelle. And not because, she was a beautiful person. And you can probably see a little of that come through in the interview where there is still a little of that, oh, it's sad, because
Yes.
she had to go through this, and I think now even of like my daughter or other young girls, and you can't prevent all the bad things from happening to them. And so there's a chance that there's going to be some other young girl who's going to go through a similar process where that kind of innocence and wholesomeness is sort of squashed out, by something bad in the
Mm,
world. But diamonds are made under pressure. There are a lot of wonderful, beautiful stories about things that grow out of something really horrific and negative. And I see myself now as having reached another level where now I'm a warrior and a protector of others. And I actually like that version of myself better than the innocent version. You know, I mean, I think
Yeah,
she was a beautiful person, but this person is kind and caring. But I also, man, you know, like, go after a victim at your own risk because if I'm on their side, I'm coming for you, you know? And I'm not afraid anymore. And my fear isn't, well, look, I should rephrase that. Everyone feels fear, right? We all do. But I have an ability now to push through the fear that I didn't have in the past.
right.
And so I'll feel it, but I have just this like muscle almost that I've built up where I know I can get through it because I've seen myself do it before. That is the most empowering thing you can possibly feel, you
Right.
know? And I'm actually really grateful that I have that now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mhm.
that's incredible. An
Mhm.
incredible message to people who are struggling in
Mm.
relationships
Yeah.
where it is not healthy. I did want to ask you a little bit about some of the elements that are kind of swirling towards the end of the story.
Okay. Yeah.
Um, you know, one of them being that, um, and I understand some of this is we can't really even maybe not even talk about just the terms of how these things go down, but you weren't just a red herring for crime storytelling. You were a red herring for the perpetrator.
Hmm.
And that same degree of trust that you placed in Ian, it appears that law enforcement
Hmm.
afforded him as well. He knew
Agreed.
exactly how to talk to them. And the documentary, to an extent, dissects the way in which he positioned you
Hmm.
to be the fall person in his own criminal pursuit.
Yeah.
What what is your sort of takeaway about how the case was handled?
Mhm.
And more importantly, what you learned about, what's your takeaway from that whole experience?
Well, so I was very deliberate in not signing anything that would prevent me from talking about Anaheim PD, so I'll go right into it. Uh,
Great.
we know, and we see this all the time, blue wall of silence. There have actually been other domestic abuse cases that involve law enforcement officers where their fellow officers have protected them. This is nothing new under the sun. Um, I knew what was happening when it was happening. And when I say that, what I mean is that right after I got out of the abusive relationship with Ian, and I told you I knew something was coming and I was afraid,
Yeah.
I started researching domestic abuse because it was starting to dawn on me what had happened, right? You know, it was like I had talked to my sister about it, I had talked to some friends, and my brain was starting to click like, oh, uh-oh, okay, wow. I'm processing this and I'm realizing that was an abusive relationship and it was pretty bad,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah.
Then I started researching domestic abuse with law enforcement. Like I literally, I mean, you know, Google was around then. You know, I'm old, but like it was around.
Yeah.
And you know, you start reading these articles, and I remember thinking, oh, uh-oh, I don't think I should report this to law enforcement because he's gonna 100% use them against me because this was already online. It's not like a secret, you know?
Right.
So I actually very deliberately did not report anything to law enforcement. So it's ironic to me that then down the road, he ended up reporting to law enforcement. And I wasn't even really surprised that he was using law enforcement against me.
Right.
And I also wasn't entirely surprised that they weren't listening to me
Mm.
because I had done my homework. But we see this in a lot of cases, like the Gabby Petito case. Even if you
Mhm.
watch the video where the cops pulled him over, and
Right.
you actually hear one of the cops say, "Oh, my woman does this kind of stuff too at home."
5.5 years. Believe me, if I were to say that me and my wife haven't had our share of spouts, I'd be lying to you.
Right. The initial dash cam footage when the two of them are
Yes.
in the car on the side of the road and the
Yeah,
cops
and the
come
cops
up.
come exactly. You know, and you watch it as a survivor and you're like, "Oh yeah, same old story." They blame the woman who of course looks upset because she's
Mhm.
just been abused, and they talk to the man like he is one of them, you
Right.
know? Now ratchet that up to another level because Ian was also law enforcement, and not only law enforcement, but he was a US Marshal, which carried even more weight. So, one thing that really stuck out to me in my case, and this is something that I just love to see change, honestly, across
Yeah.
the country, um, One is there's just no education on domestic abuse with law enforcement officers. They don't understand it. They don't know how to handle it. They can't recognize it when they see it. No one's training them on coercive control. No one's training them on power dynamics. So they're walking into these situations, and oftentimes they're clueless. Now, you'll get occasionally some that know a little bit more and they understand and they've seen some cases and stuff and they care. But by and large, it's just really not taught to law enforcement officers. The other thing is these guys did no investigation on my side whatsoever. I mean, I cannot stress enough. I was calling them, leaving voicemail messages, trying to get the detective assigned to call me back and talk
Mm,
to me
right,
because I had some evidence already, right?
right,
That they could have used. I had evidence that I was in a place where I had no access to emails or phone or anything. Like I could prove it. I mean, I'm not talking like, oh, someone
yeah,
says that I didn't have access. I'm talking I had like hardcore, you cannot deny this evidence that I was in a place where I could not access emails. And I was also very far away from anywhere where this was happening.
right,
Had they known that, that might have caused them to look a little bit more closely. We also know, and we knew this at the beginning, that some of the IP addresses were not masked. So, had they simply run it through an IP address tracker, which my dad was able to figure out how to do, they would have seen right off the bat that it went right back to the condo. They also knew that Ian was responding to the Craigslist ads from his own personal email address.
right,
There were 2 video cameras set up on the garage and on the, entrance to the alley into the garage. There's one way in, one way out. Y There's no way you could get past the video cameras, because, tall building, right?
right,
I mean, unless you're Spider-Man, but, I'm pretty sure we didn't have any
yeah,
Spider-Mans over there. And the video cameras didn't show anything either. So there were so many data points that had they done even just a like surface level investigation, they would have been like, "Hmm, this is strange."
right,
You know, so for me, it was just a massive failure, in just any willingness to investigate and also in, quite frankly, an understanding of domestic abuse.
right.
Yeah.
And what a flipping of the script where
Yeah.
you're being targeted for harassment
Yeah.
in a scenario. It's so chilling in the documentary when you hear the footage of them talking about how, oh, well, this doesn't rise beyond the level of a misdemeanor, the kind of harassment you're experiencing. And you're just thinking as you're watching it, like, oh my God, like, what if you were in Michelle's shoes just a, you know, j- very recently before that, and you don't have a plan in place or an ability to go to law enforcement and protect yourself from this kind of assault. It does highlight the um the gap between the dangers that people experience in relationships and law enforcement's ability, one, to like respond to those things,
Yeah.
but then also to effectively investigate them when they happen.
Absolutely, absolutely, and it's the most powerless feeling in the world.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so glad that you got out of
Yeah.
that. One other thing I was thinking about when I watched it, of course, um, Angela Diaz is not a part of the documentary, declines to be a
Of
part of the
yeah.
documentary. And yet, in a way, both of them, of course, serve terms for what they did.
Yes. Mhm.
She confesses to it.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, I wonder how you view her and her involvement in what happened to you, because she is his partner too,
Yeah,
and you know what he was capable of.
exactly. So I know that Ian is capable of just an extreme amount of manipulation, control, gaslighting,
Mm,
and also just honestly dark things. So when I think about Angela, I think of her as sort of his pawn, his weapon, something that he used, or someone that he used. And I think he knew what he was looking for in his
mm,
next relationship. That's my suspicion.
yeah,
So, I never spent time with her in person. So, outside of what I know of Ian, I really don't know much about her.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, didn't mean to imply in any way that she isn't responsible for the time that she served,
Of course.
but
Yeah.
certainly it's an, I wondered how you felt about
If it
her.
if it tells you anything, I didn't go to her sentencing hearing to read a victim impact statement.
Mm,
I actually waited. I did at Ian's though. Yeah.
yes. Yeah. Um, One last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a recurring theme in this documentary, and I think what makes your story so empowering and unique among stories that have received this kind of attention over the last decades,
Mm-hmm.
is that you are not only the um, recipient of an unbelievable cascade of manipulation and terrorizing by a partner, somebody who you thought at one point you were in love with, but you make it out on the other side of
Mm-hmm.
all of this and you reclaim your story, both for others and for yourself. And there's this really powerful moment where you talk about the name
Mm.
that you were handed in this
Yes.
situation, the Lilith is truth idea, that
Mm-hmm.
you were somehow this like
Yeah.
female version of a devil-like
Yeah.
character, a bad
Yeah, well, so
seed,
do you know
right.
that so I didn't know the story of her fully
Yes,
until this happened and Ian sort of picked this character, for lack of a better way to refer to it
right.
for me.
Yeah,
And I remember when he picked this character, I was like, this is so weird. And then, after all of this happened, and one time I looked, I mean, I have a weird relationship with it because sometimes I'm like, I don't want to know too much because it's a little freaky. But
yeah.
I looked it up, and it turns out that Lilith in like the origin story came before Eve, and basically she was disobedient. So she stands up to Adam, she stands up to God. She just got, I don't want to listen to no man. And then she basically just takes off into the desert.
Right.
And when I read this story, I thought, that's interesting, you know, because there were also a lot of themes in some of the emails he sent where he would label me a suffragette and all of these other very kind of like women's empowerment type things.
Hmm.
And, there's that moment in the documentary where, I've come to realize that maybe in some way he saw that in me before I saw it in myself,
Hmm.
that I am a very strong woman. And, it's interesting because it was in fact that strength that allowed me to come out on the other side
It's
and reclaim my
incredible.
story. Yeah.
It's so incredible. It's such an awesome flipping of the metaphor
Yeah.
in a story where so often your own situation was being used against you.
Yes.
In the end, you
Hmm.
made it out on the other side,
Yeah.
which is so incredible. And
Mhm.
now you have a daughter,
Yes, I do. Uh-huh.
and I wonder how you think about
Mm.
as she gets older,
Yeah.
and young women in particular, because you were young when this happened.
Yeah.
Um, as you say in the documentary, perhaps hadn't had enough experience to even sort of see the
Mhm.
signs of ways in which your identity was being carved out by this person.
Yes.
What what you would want your daughter and other young women to know as far as the warning signs
Yeah.
for the situation that you went through?
Yeah, such a wonderful question. Because prevention, what an ounce of prevention is I forget what the expression is, but you know what I'm trying to say.
Yes. A
That
lot.
is,
It's
yeah,
a
it's a
lot.
lot. It's a lot. And it can go far. So one of the first things I actually always tell people is slow down the early stages of dating.
Mm,
If I could give one piece of advice to everyone, it's that
mm,
because abusers thrive in speed. Why? Because speed doesn't give you time to think.
mm,
And you need time to think, to assess. You can't spot the red flags if you don't have any time to digest, right? And a lot of the times, abusers will go after those people who are very thoughtful, Maybe their brains are, pretty active, and so, they'll do like those deep dives and they'll really think thoughtfully about things. So they might need a little extra time to like in between dates to be like, how did I feel about that? Or he made
Right.
that weird comment here. So that's thing one is just slow it down, And that means both in terms of how quickly you commit to the person, but also just in terms of like spacing out the dates enough so you have time to think, to breathe, and also so they don't take over your life right away. Because that's also something that they're doing when they're moving quickly and they're going, back to back dates and they're love bombing you with like all the gifts and the attention. You don't even have time for your own life.
Right.
That should never be happening in the early stages of dating. You should always still have time. Like, you shouldn't be saying no to your favorite hobby or to going out with your friends. Um, these are just little strategies and tactics you can use. The second thing is, and this one sometimes gets a little controversial because people are like, oh, well, some people have that kind of sense of humor. Okay, sure. But people should not be making jokes at your expense that hurt you.
Mm.
And one of the things I tell people is if someone makes a comment that kind of puts you down or it's like a mean joke, the best test to see if they're just, maybe they just have that kind of humor is to set the boundary with them. And if you don't feel comfortable setting the boundary with that person around that, that already is enough of a red flag, right? Because
Right.
that means that person doesn't feel safe.
You're sort of inviting that critique of
Yeah,
you in the future in other situations where they feel like they can
they can.
insinuate and into
Yeah,
your
yeah, and that's one of the things with these relationships is
yeah.
that as it goes down the road, like the early comment might have been something kind of small
Mm.
that maybe you just didn't really like, but then later they continue to escalate it. And what they're really doing is they're trying to erode your self-esteem over time. They're trying to make you feel bad about yourself. And it might start in something small that doesn't really do that, but that small thing is them testing the fence
Right.
to see, you know, is it is the fence sturdy? Is it strong? Is it electrocuted? What's going on here?
Mm.
But if they find that there's a hole in the fence, then they're like, "Oh, great, cool, I'm gonna get in, I'm gonna get in this fence, and now I'm gonna get past the next fence, and,
Right.
and I'm just gonna keep going until I get to the center." And you have to be willing to set some of those boundaries early, and you can do it in a nice way. You can just say, "Hey, I get you were just trying to be funny, but, that didn't feel really good, and,
Right.
I'm not really a fan of, like, that kind of humor," and, like, a good person who, I mean, it could just also be it's not a good fit from a humor standpoint. That's actually okay for you guys to decide early on. So that's thing number 3 or 2, and then thing number 3 is, and it's kind of related, but they're gonna test any boundary they can. So if they're trying to push your sexual boundaries, if they're trying to make you change your appearance, if they're trying to tell you that you shouldn't hang out with your friends, these are really early warning signs that they're trying to get control over you and break you down.
Mm.
So those are my top 3 things that I think are pretty easy to remember, hopefully,
Yeah, those
where
are good.
people can just say, "Look, slowing it down," because quite frankly, you slow it down, that's a huge one because they'll honestly, the abusers will often bounce if you have that boundary of going slow. They
Yeah.
won't like that,
Yeah. Give yourself space to make sure you're in the right
Yeah,
situation.
yeah, and
Yeah.
process it. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Michelle, thank you so much for joining us
Yeah.
on the show today. And I wish you the best of luck in your journey to bring your learning from this um, tremendously unfortunate series of events into something that can be empowering
Mm,
and, uh, and moving forward into your life in
mm.
a positive way. So I just can't thank you enough for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks. Hey, y'all, thank you so much for joining us on Crime Scene. Just a reminder here you can watch or listen to us on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. This show is a production of Sony Podcasts and The Binge. Thank you to everybody who makes this happen week in and week out. Also, we're journalists. We love journalism. These stories have been deeply reported, the ones that you hear on the show, and you can find an extensive bibliography by going to the show notes of this episode and to every episode to learn more about the reporting that informed all of the great stories you hear on Crime Scene. And just one last note, you can get exclusive content from us and The Binge, over 60 jaw-dropping true crime stories, bingeable and ad-free right now by signing up for our Patreon at getthebinge.com. So go to getthebinge.com to get access to our entire catalog of stories, but also to get behind the scenes access to all of the stories that Cooper and I are working on. To join us in the conversation about these cases, go to getthebinge.com to learn more.